Sorry, on this. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to Sustainable Success, the podcast. Today, I'm very fortunate to have my friend Michael Petrella joining me. Michael is the owner of STG Strength and Power, a facility which was recently featured in an article called The 5 Gyms You Have to Train At Before You Die. And also, I remember he was awarded an award at a resistance exercise conference, I believe. Geez, was that 2020, Mike, or 2019?
2019, I think.
2019, for the Envy Award for of all the various practitioners that were there for having the nicest facility. I've been to Michael's facility. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about what he's got set up. I don't know when I first met Mike, but my first memories that are coming to mind were back in 2007, 2008, when I competed in bodybuilding. And I guess we met before that on social media or whatnot. And I had gotten, if you remember, Doug McGuff to come in and speak to us via satellite, more or less, but long before the COVID, and we were all doing things online, he was in. And I remember at the time, so that's 2007, if I'm not mistaken, you were about 24 years old at the time. Does that sound about right?
I'm just trying to think. If I recall, I probably would have come in contact with you originally on the Dr. Darden board because that was before Facebook.
Right.
And you started the is it the '09 HIT conference in Toronto?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yep.
And you might have been following, I had done this long thing before I competed called My Journey Back from Triple Bypass Surgery or something like that.
Yep.
In which I documented my progress and that.
So I believe that weekend was the first that I would have met you in person. And as for Dr. McGuff, me and him were, I guess, slated to kind of debate back and forth against each other on, I forget what the topic was now, but it wasn't much of a debate because we agreed on more than we disagreed on. I think it was about making a program individual for the person based on genetics, or I forget exactly what it was at the time, but I remember you had a number of speakers there and it was a lot of fun. And I was born in '85, so you can do the math from 2009 there. I was in my early 20s at the time.
Yeah, and I remember being very impressed, and my brother was there, about the depth and breadth of your knowledge, considering your relative youth at the time. You're still, as far as I'm concerned, still relative youth. So your journey in strength training, sports, I know you're also involved in martial arts, teaching a form of jiu-jitsu and whatnot. So just tell me a little bit about your background in terms of sports and exercise, and how did you become interested?
Well, like most good Canadians, played hockey, and I was quite tall. So I was playing in an era where obstruction was part of the game. Fights were in every game. It was certainly a tougher game back then. And I had a decent amount of skill and I had a decent amount of height, but I was certainly underweight for my size. I ended up being about 6'4", but I think the day I went to the gym, I was about 6'3". I think I grew another inch or so, and I was 162 pounds. So it's very, very thin at that particular height. And, without knowing anything, everyone tells you, you got to start hitting the weights and going to the gym to put on strength and size. And I can just remember clearly like it was yesterday, my very first workout. It was with a trainer named Kent. And afterwards, my whole body was shaking. He was a little concerned about the way I was reacting to it. And I remember him asking if I was okay. And I just knew instinctively. I said, this is exactly where I want to be. And that's the short form of it. I just knew there was something special to resistance exercise. And I got fairly immediate results like most people when they first start. So that obviously gets you hooked. And it just started down a path of trying to learn more and more. And in regards to, I guess, being knowledgeable at a young age with your conference, I can credit a lot of that to two guys. I'd spent some time with Brian Johnson, who I think is even underrated in terms of how smart he is, and most people know how smart he is. He had published a huge amount of information in the 90s and the 2000s, and you can still get your hands on it. It holds up today. And also, I was fortunate enough to pretty much every weekend for a couple of years, at least one night, I was spending it in Randy Roach's living room and gym, and I was just sitting there and absorbing everything I could from him. And I feel that he is the foremost exercise historian. I don't know anyone who knows more than he does. In fact, most of the people I come across who really know their stuff, at one point or another, they call Randy and they ask him to verify. He's just unbelievable with his knowledge. And I was very fortunate to be able to spend, hundreds, if not thousands of hours with him. So I kind of stand on the shoulders of giants, and that's where I got a lot of my early information from.
Okay, interesting. I was going to ask you actually how I haven't heard of or from Randy in a long time. Is he okay?
Randy's good. He still has unbelievable gym setup. He's just put in some new equipment from Iron Core from Tyler Hobson. I don't think he's writing anything right now. I know that he had at least started the last volume of Muscle, Smoke, and Mirrors. That was a few years back now. I'm not sure where he is on the progress. He's very much into the political scene, especially in the United States. He follows it very passionately. So I'll probably call him up and ask him about something to do with, muscle physiology or exercise equipment. And within 5 minutes, we're talking politics. So he's very passionate in that front these days.
Well, and for viewers who haven't heard the name Randy Roach, his collection of books, I think there's 3 so far, right? Called Muscle, Smoke, and Mirrors, all 3 of which I've read and own, is the closest thing I think you're going to get to an encyclopedia of the history of not just bodybuilding, but the whole strength training game, starting from, early 20th century, late 19th century, all the way up to, I guess the last book got us up to about the 80s with the contest with Arnold Schwarzenegger and the controversial. So anybody interested in that topic should be sure to look those things up. So now you went from training with somebody playing hockey to eventually getting your own facility and becoming somewhat of a collector, among other things, because you have obviously an incredibly well-equipped facility. But some of the pieces, I suppose they're all utilitarian and work and do different things better than others. But some of them, are almost like the early prototypes. They're extremely hard to find. Now, do you have those because you're just sort of a collector, or they all have their own benefit as far as for your clients, or a bit of both?
Yeah, little column A, little column B. It started with the old Nautilus machines for me, just because, again, at my height, I got pretty long legs, pretty long arms, and a lot of the traditional barbell movements weren't great for me. If you would ever see me squat with a bar, it's not a pretty sight. I don't got great leverages for it. Even for someone who's relatively tall, I have longer femurs than even someone who would normally be my height. So these lifts didn't work. And when I started reading about the mechanics of some of these exercise machines with Arthur Jones, and it made sense to me. So I picked up a Nautilus double chest and a pullover with a pull down combo. And I would learn later on that the model they used for it was Kim Wood, who I think was 6'2" back in his younger years. So they designed the machines with someone who is a very similar body type to me. And I remember the first time I got on Nautilus pullover, just thinking, wow, this really feels right. I got a tremendous amount of benefit out of it. So it started with the old Nautilus, which have become exceedingly rare. So it started as the tool for me. And then just as time has gone on, it's become rarer and more valuable. And when it comes to buying equipment now, the majority of it is just trying to find what is the best piece available. There might be a line of equipment where they made 10 pieces and 9 of them were terrible and 1 of them was fantastic, and we'll try to go get that one. There's certainly lines that have more winners than losers, and we try to stick with those brands. Every now and then I buy something that's more for me than for clients because it's rare and I like it. But there isn't too much that I buy that doesn't have a function. Some of the pieces, they might get used more, by the people that are, say, over 6 foot, and there might be some pieces that are more conducive to an average population. And we're lucky they got the floor space now that we can kind of have both, which is great. So yeah, in some cases there is a collector vibe to it, but more often than not, if it's not seeing daily or at least weekly use on the floor, I'm probably going to sell it or replace it with something else.
Right. So in your facility, it's obviously, I noticed that recently you posted a video where you have a second facility that you're going to dedicate to one-on-one training. Now, with your current facility, you're still doing personal training, but obviously with the size of it and the number of machines you have, do you know the actual number of machines? Is there a number?
So I've been asked that a lot of times. It's actually tough to say the exact number, and the reason being is there's a bunch of pieces. Like if you have a cable crossover that's doesn't have a cross member, so it's two separate stacks, and you could put it two different places in the gym. Is that one machine or two machine?
Right.
Are you counting benches? Are you not counting benches? Like, so it depends how you want to look at it. But any way you slice it, we're over 100.
Over 100.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, so in that facility, are there people who come in and just train on their own, or is all supervised workouts?
Everything is supervised one-on-one with the trainer. We don't have any open memberships.
Okay. Now, what does your clientele look like? I know that for me, and you've heard Doug McGuff give a talk that he's given a few times where when he first started, he expected he was going to be working with athletes and sports people and young people and bodybuilders, and he wound up realizing that the people who gravitated towards sort of supervised one-on-one training were often an older population that, and I was just listening to a podcast by him earlier this morning, so his words were, that wouldn't be caught dead in Gold's Gym. In your facility, I do know that in the past, I believe you've said you've dealt with powerlifters who came to work with you. What does your clientele typically look like? Is it more of a broad spectrum?
So at any given time, we can have an athlete in their teens to somebody in their 80s and beyond. If you were to look at the meat and potatoes of our client base, it's certainly middle-aged men and women. Generally, they have a certain level of success in their life because they have a personality type that they're willing to be pushed that hard on a week-to-week basis. And also we have a price point that is much higher than a typical gym membership. So they have to have a certain income as well. And normally that goes hand in hand. I find that many of my clients have, when you get to know them, taken exceptional risks in their life and have been rewarded for it. So that's certainly where our average person is. And it's funny because I consider them to be anything but average in terms of how they would interact in society. But again, we also have a physiotherapist and sports therapist on staff, and they're working with people with injuries all the time. When it comes to the athletics, I find that a lot of the younger athletes now, they're actually in the weight room less than when I was in high school. It's very interesting. I don't know if it's because sports have become less physical. Like I was talking about hockey earlier, there's all-stars in the NHL that I think 20 years ago wouldn't even been in the league, not because they didn't have a high level of skill, but because they just physically wouldn't have been able to deal with the rules that were in place at that particular time. Whereas most of the athletes, I guess 20 years ago now, were all in the weight room doing something, whether they were doing it right or wrong. I know I was definitely doing lots of things wrong back then. I don't see it as much as I do now. Whereas on the other side of things, when you're talking about your middle-aged population, they weren't in the weight room as much. You know, if you caught someone who was, say, 55 in the weight room, they were almost considered a gym rat. You know, they lived there, they lived that lifestyle. It wasn't just your average person. And what I like to come back to, it was probably only 5 or 6 years ago, I was still getting into it with medical doctors in my area about whether strength training should be part of someone's overall health. And, you know, me and you would both agree that it should be the cornerstone. And they were still looking at the idea that if you trained with weights, that you're somehow going to hurt yourself or break the body down or cause heart damage or whatever they were talking about. And just in the last 5 or 6 years, we now get basically medical prescriptions from people in like doctors that are in the medical field for their clients to start engaging in strength training for their overall health. So there's been a big shift, at least in my area, towards maybe people that are 45, 50, 55 who have never weight trained, getting into it for the first time because now their medical professional is telling them to do so. And I'm seeing less people in the younger demographic. Maybe that's technology based. Maybe that's, like I said, has to do with the differences in the sports. I'm not sure where they're all getting their advice from, but I'm definitely seeing a swing, even from just even if someone couldn't afford me, you get an idea of who's coming in the door and asking. And we're seeing more and more in that middle-aged demographic and less in the younger demographic.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Going back, we were talking earlier about Randy Roach, and there are a number of instances in his book where it seems like science just caught up with the bodybuilders. Things that some of these guys knew instinctively a long time ago, and at the time, the MDs would have been said those guys are all muscle bound and they're hurting their hearts and all these things. And now the doctors are coming around, and of course, science is probably saying that they came up with it in the first place. So the one thing I remember that I found you explain really eloquently is the similarities from two approaches that seemed at first to be contrasting between, Arthur Jones and the brief, infrequent, high-intensity training, or even super slow with continuous tension, and some of the things that Vince Gironda would prescribe, which would have been considered really high volume, but in the end you were, and correct me here if I'm misquoting you, that in some ways the two methods were accomplishing many of the same things, but coming at it from a different angle. Am I misquoting you or paraphrasing too liberally?
So if I'm not mistaken, when me and Dr. McGuff had our, I don't really use the term debate because, like I said, we pretty much agreed on most things. He at the time was talking about genetic markers in helping determine, I guess, what a typical trainee might be able to handle in terms of volume and recovery. And certainly back in 2009, that probably would have been right on the cutting edge. And we know more about it now, and he continues to work as well. And what I was interested in, and I learned this a lot from Randy, was you could take somebody, and he was, I'm trying to think what the tribes were in Africa, and what they were looking at was if you had a predominantly meat-eating tribe and a predominantly vegetarian tribe, in general, the meat-eating tribe was bigger, stronger, and taller. And what would be interesting is when they would take a mate from the vegetarian tribe, a female from the vegetarian tribe, if the offspring was raised on the typical meat-eating diet, they would eventually become as large and strong and tall as the males would be. And it just kind of gave to the idea that, okay, yes, we might have a genetic sequence, genetic code, but obviously there's ways of the body to express it in different ways. And I think the science of epigenetics has allowed us to understand more and more about that. And then getting that back to Arthur and Vince, because this was, again, it kind of came from Randy. He taught it to me as, they were holding different pieces of the same puzzle. And, it was looking at the entire puzzle once it was connected. And if you want to get, I guess, deeper into their training methodologies, as I understand them to be, you look at a typical Vince Gironda. I think his honest workout was 8 sets of 8 for a muscle group with like 15 seconds in between. You could look at 8 sets from a hit point of view and say, that's a lot of volume, but 8 sets of 8, and he was using, a 1-1 cadence, 1-2 cadence, something like that. I'd be willing to bet that the time in the gym and the time under load would not be too much different than a typical high intensity guy doing, say, a set of pullovers and a set of pull downs back to back for the upper back with the 2-4 cadence to failure with maybe some advanced, forced reps at the end of it. If you actually timed the amount of time that the muscle was working and working hard, it's probably going to be pretty close. And like I said, both of them put people on the Mr. Olympia stage. Both of them were incredibly successful as trainers and put out good information. And it's really easy at face value to say that they're diametrically opposed, but it was always my thoughts, and certainly I got some of this from Randy, that they were actually closer together than they were apart.
Okay. Now, recently, I was able to acquire a MedX medical lumbar machine from you. So because this podcast, of course, I will share with my clients, and in the hope of using the benefits of the medical lumbars, potentially attracting new clients. So you've had and used in your facility that particular piece for how many years now did you first start using it?
I got a core MedX low back, which is like the stripped down version that they sold after Arthur sold the company. Sometime in the late 2000s. I'd have to look it back up. And I think I got my first medical in 2010 or 2011. Again, I'd have to look up the years. I had the core for a couple of years, then I've had the medical for over a decade now. So,
and what attracted you to wanting that piece for your clients and for yourself? And what have you been, because I've heard people some people would say almost hype it up as, being almost a miracle machine. Others, not so much, but I'll focus on the positive for the time being. In your mind, it's what is the benefit of people using this machine on a regular basis that you wouldn't get from other machines or other exercise modalities?
When I first started reading about the MedX technology and specifically the medical technology, first of all, the research, a lot of it was done with Arthur and Dr. Ted Dreisinger. There's a couple of texts out there. It's dry reading, but if you really want to know your stuff, it's worth going through. And what they really were talking about was creating an exercise that allowed you to really target the musculature of the lumbar and allow people to train it safely and progressively. And it's not that there isn't other ways to get at those muscles, but a lot of the exercises that people use are predominantly glute hip exercises. And certainly training the glutes and the hips and making them strong can help people with lower back problems as well. But being able to train it directly really made a lot of sense for me. And then, I started reading into some of the case studies, and at the end of the day, I believed the text, but like most things, I wanted to see and feel it for myself. And I probably talked about it briefly in the past with people, but I had really bad lower back pain in my late teens and early 20s. And what I didn't understand at the time, it was from all the hockey I was playing. And it wasn't necessarily from the impact of hits. It's because I was playing so much and I was always shooting to the one side. Hockey players don't shoot back and forth. The stick is only curved one way. So if you were to touch into my lower back, especially after I played a game or practice, the one side would feel almost squishy and the other side would feel like a steel cable. And I was using inversion after almost every time I got off the ice just to manage the pain. And I'm not one for drugs, so I wasn't going to take any sort of painkillers. And it allowed me to get through, but it certainly wasn't an answer or a solution. So when I finally got the MedX low back, it really helped me personally get rid of the pain and strengthen things up. And then when I got into the medical version, I had already developed 3 or 4 fairly decent ways of, in my opinion, strengthening the lower back and at the very least mitigating people who had pain in their lower back. But I just found that through my own personal experience, the machine was beating my previous results with any of the other methodologies I was using. So, if you have the machine sitting there and it's just a matter of setting somebody up and it's beating all the previous methodologies, you just go with the machine. And now I've been fortunate. I've had hundreds, maybe even over 1,000 people on the machine now. I'd have to look at the logs, and it just works very, very well. And for some people, it is a miracle machine because they've had lower back pain for, not just a month or a year, but decades in some cases. And after a few months or even a few weeks, shorter time than that, it really does wonders for them. And yes, there are people on the other side that are detractors against it. It's been my experience that the majority of the detractors don't have access to one. They're looking at it from more of a static point of view, whereas they say, okay, well, this is this and this is that, but they're not using it with themselves or clients over a matter of weeks, months, or years. And the only thing that I would say is, you can get them on the used market now. They're not $50,000 American anymore. Try it out. That's why I bought it. I wanted to see for myself, and it worked well, and it continues to work well. And if somebody comes up with a device or methodology that I find to be superior, works better and safer, I'll abandon what I'm doing. But as far as it goes for now, it's the best method that I've come across, and we use it daily with people.
Are any populations that shouldn't use the medical lumbar?
So to set up a medical lumbar properly, you have to kind of wedge their hips against the back roller pads. And the reason they made it a roller pad was to show the trainer if they're getting too much rotation in the hip as opposed to the lumbar muscles completing the exercise. I have come across people that their lower backs are so bad and so degenerated that without even doing motion, just putting them into the machine before you tighten them down, they can't put pressure on their lower back. Now, that's dealing with someone with a tremendously bad lower back, and you almost have to start with baby steps before you get them to something like the medical lumbar. They're not the rule, they are the exception. But certainly if you press a hand on someone's lower back and it gives them pain just from doing that, you have to start somewhere else.
Right. Interestingly, I know that MedX on their website, the manufacturer of that machine, refers to having spent more money on research than all other exercise machine companies combined. And I suspect that most of that went into the development of the medical lumbar, because Arthur Jones, the former owner of MedX, was truly obsessed with that particular body part.
I would go as far as probably saying that MedX hasn't spent $1 on research since Arthur left the company. So you're probably correct that it was all from him, and almost all of his time went into the medical devices. Even most of the non-medical MedX machines, Arthur never designed. Not to say that he didn't have, at least rubber stamping them, but most of them were designed by Phil Stencil. And Arthur put the majority of his time into the medical lumbar and some of the other medical machines. He was, as far as I understand, he was also very big on the leg extension. And I also think Phil was a part of those projects, but to the best of my knowledge, the majority of Arthur's time and money went into the medical devices and the research that went with them. And I know he did a lot of the research at the University of Florida, and I believe the University in San Diego.
So now your clientele, you said you got everything from high school kids to people in their 80s and beyond. Who's your oldest client that you've had over the years?
Oldest I trained was 91.
What was that?
Oldest I trained was 91 years old.
Oh, 91. Okay, your audio there just became muffled for a second. 91 years old. And of course, I hesitate to ask this because, of course, if they were 91, they may no longer be with us anymore. But how long did they stay with you?
Unfortunately, he didn't train very long. He was already in fairly tough health when he came in, and the reason he came in because I trained his grandson and his granddaughter, and they had told him to come in, and I trained him a few times. And I remember it was in the winter, and it was his wife who always did the scheduling for him, and we had a real bad ice storm, and I remember that she said that he didn't want him to leave the house just because he definitely was like a fall risk at any given time, and he didn't come in because of an ice storm. I never seen him again. And I think about 6 months later, I had heard that he had he had passed away. So that was the oldest I trained. I certainly didn't spend a lot of time with them, but I've had clients in their 80s that I've spent years with, and I've certainly have clients in their 70s that have been with me for, oh geez, close to 10 years now.
And is there a point in time with older clients where father time starts to win, despite your best instruction, best equipment, and everything else, that they start to lose strength? Or you're still seeing people incrementally, I'm sure, still just getting a little bit stronger all the time?
A lot of that question, the answer to that is about what their past is. So if I got somebody, say at 60 years old, and they had trained their whole lives through their 20s and 30s and 40s, they're going to eventually go down. There's just nothing you can do about it. Now, with proper resistance training and certainly a good diet, their rate of decline is substantially less than average people in our population. So it's obviously still a good idea to do it. At a certain point, if you were to say measure off their arms, they're not going to get any bigger, but you'd be surprised how long they can keep a fairly substantial measurement. I have had people that measured their arms at 60 and 70. They didn't really grow, but they didn't go down either. And I know for some people that are 21 listening to that, that might not be a great statistic, but believe me, when you've trained enough people up at that age, it's fantastic. If they have come in at say 50 or 60 and they've never trained, then I can pretty much guarantee you I can make sure that they're stronger, and in some cases more muscular at 70 than they were, just because they've never done anything. But they certainly aren't going to be better than what they were when their testosterone, their other hormonal profile was much higher and much better back in the day.
So one of the podcasts I listened to, you were being interviewed by Lawrence Neal. And the topic of that particular podcast was how you onboard people and what you say to people in the first interview. And I remember you, if I'm paraphrasing too liberally, correct me, that you like sort of a keep it simple kind of approach, and basically summarize that all else being equal, a stronger you is a better you, and I'm going to make you stronger. Can you elaborate a little more on sort of explaining to people why a stronger you is a better you?
Well, yeah, you're pretty much right with what we say for the onboarding. I'll touch on just a little bit of that first. My dad, he owns a car dealership. Now he sells ATVs. So I'd watched him sell thousands and thousands of vehicles, and he had other salesmen over the years. Some were good, some weren't so good. And I would, even as a kid, consistently watch some of these lesser salespeople have people come in and they want to buy the car. Like they have their checkbook out, and the salesperson would talk them out of it by just telling them way too much, more than they'd ever want to know about the vehicle. And I found that sometimes as a salesperson, you have to listen to obviously what they want, but you got to get out of your own way. If me and you might be able to talk shop for hours, and some of our friends in the industry, but most of the people coming in, they don't care for what our wealth of knowledge is. They want 5% of what we know, not 95% of what we know. And that other 95% we use situationally as it comes up. So first off, I say, yeah, you got to keep it simple, because I'm not going to get into high level muscle physiology or biomechanics with a client. If they understood that stuff, they wouldn't be coming to see you. They would just be doing it. If I take my car to a mechanic, I don't need him to explain to me all the workings of an internal combustion engine. I just want to know, can he fix my car or not? And so I've always believed in keeping it simple. And then as for the, a stronger you is a better you, I can kind of tailor that argument to whatever their particular situation is, because it's a universally true statement. So, say they have some sort of pain in their joints. Well, if all the musculature around that joint gets strengthened, in most cases, the clearances become better and they become, more pain-free, or at least more functional in that joint. That's going to be good for them. If they have a job that has a lot of labor involved, again, the stronger they are, the easier that particular job is going to be. If you take somebody who's weak and get them to perform manual labor all day, the stress on the body is going to be very substantial. If you make sure that they're relatively strong or stronger than they were, the stress of that job should become less. They'll become better at their job. They'll have an easier time with it. and I just listen to what their particular reason for coming in the gym is. And, almost all cases, them being stronger is going to increase their quality of life, increase their longevity, just do positive things for them. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of too many reasons why having any weaker structure in the body would be advantageous for a human being.
So, all right, and of course, I was in the insurance industry for 30 years, as I think you know, and one of the products that we sold was long-term care insurance. And in order to claim on long-term care insurance, if you own the policy, you would have to show that you were unable to do 2 of 6 activities of daily living. And those activities start with transferring. So I always remember these by thinking about what I do when I first get up in the morning. So walking from your bed to the bathroom, which is what most people do, is transferring. Using the bathroom or toileting is number 2. Number 3 for a lot of people is going to be showering. So that's bathing. That's number 3. And then after, you're getting dressed. So that's dressing. So there's, number 4. And then have something to eat. So that is feeding. And then the 6th one, which actually you don't have to have if you have the 6th one, you don't have to have a 2nd one to claim, and that's cognitive. If you have a cognitive impairment where it's unsafe to leave you alone, then you get to claim. And it doesn't sound very sexy. It's not like, being ripped and going on the beach and looking like a bodybuilder. But for many people, if you're unable, those are all things that most of us, those of us who are fortunate enough to have good health, take for granted. But you take away your ability to do any one or certainly 2 of those, and your quality of life is seriously deteriorated. And of course, all those things, if you think about it, are directly related to strength. And even the cognitive part, you might say, well, that's the exception, but I'm just listening to Doug McGuff talk about myokines and how strength training actually has a lot of very positive things, and more is linked to strength. So, I guess I'm going off of the just stronger you is a better you, but for a lot of people, being able to do all those things for as long as they can is going to be, the difference between, quality of life or lack thereof.
If I can add 2 things to that, I actually have a client, and she actually brought the research to my attention because she has Alzheimer's in her family. And it was research that suggested that weight training might be, I would never say it's a cure, that would be wrong, but it would have the potential to stave off things as prevalent in our society as Alzheimer's. And I believe the research was suggesting that it had to do with the body learning all these different movement patterns that you would get through resistance training. And talking about cognitive decline, there is research, again, like the one I just cited, that suggests that when we engage in productive strength training, that we are not flexing the brain, but we are creating positive adaptations that might have huge benefits to the health and well-being of our brain. And to get somewhat anecdotal on this, if you were to look at the fathers of modern day physical culture before the drugs came in, and that really changes the game, and we don't have time to get into all of that, but a lot of these men, and I say men because there wasn't a lot of women strength training back at that point, they lived into their 90s and in some cases their hundreds in very, very good health. And when you think about the time period, medicine wasn't nearly as evolved. We have depressions during these times where living conditions could be quite difficult. Obviously, not having enough money and resources to feed yourself. I mean, they did suffer through some fairly troubling times, and for them to live disease-free into their 90s, in some cases their hundreds, with their lifestyles of just eating whole foods and exercising with some sort of regularity and focusing on strength, they had tremendous benefit from that. And again, a lot of that comes from Randy's teachings. And unfortunately, when the drugs come in, yes, we get bigger and we get stronger and we get more athletic and it changes the game. But now we start seeing the heart attacks coming in. And obviously, we have a whole separate topic with what we did to our food supply. But again, getting back to eating well, eating whole foods, and engaging in regular strength training, we do have enough, like I said, anecdotal data from the past to suggest these people were probably living close to an ideal lifestyle if you're looking for health and longevity.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the drugs and I would say prejudices against strength training, it was seen a lot of times as almost like a freak show, and of course with the drugs it almost became one. And so as a result of that, such a valuable adjunct to people's lives was often overlooked and ignored. I am going to be, you said 45 minutes. As I look at my clock here, I've been with you for about 45 minutes.
I got another 10 minutes if you have any more questions.
Okay, great. So yesterday I actually did a podcast with Mark Hasanovich. Mm-hmm. And when I asked him towards the end, what is the one thing I didn't ask you about and that you feel is really important for listeners or viewers to hear about, he talked a lot about how strongly he believes in the importance of keeping the neck strong. I gather that's something you would agree with. Is there anything, would you emphasize that more, or is there anything else that I haven't asked you about that you think is important for people who are considering training in a facility like yours or mine, or for any of the other trainers throughout the world that do what we do? What message would you give to them as a sort of parting message?
I'm going to touch on Mark's stuff just for a second, then I'll see if I can answer your question with the proper authority. I almost wish Mark wouldn't have to say that. And what I mean by it is the neck should be trained just like any other part of the body. And just because it's been neglected for so long, I think it's completely fair of him and some others to focus on it the way that they do. I think we got 6 neck machines at STG. So I've been big on it for a long time. One of the first machines I bought after my first couple of Nautilus was a 2nd gen Nautilus 4-way neck. And I believed in neck training ever since. One of the things I do say to clients, and this is with full sincerity, and I say it as a reminder, I have also said it as a sales pitch. I say it as unfortunately, I told you so once they've been in a car accident. We have had some clients who have had car accidents, that I hope you never need the neck strength that we're going to provide you with. But if you do, you're going to need it instantly, and you're going to need it in abundance. And what that basically means is, when they get into some situation where there's a large amount of impact to their body, I have seen it several times. And there's people who want to dispute that you can prevent concussions with neck strengthening. And there's some people that are on the forefront of the research that say you can. But regardless of what side of that argument you're on, I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that if you are in something like a non-fatal car accident and you have strong, non-atrophied muscles in your neck, chances are you're going to go home and you'll have a sore neck for a couple of days, maybe a mild headache, and within a few days you'll be completely recovered and you'll be just fine. If you have not had the luxury of training those muscles, you're probably going to get some severe soft tissue damage in that neck. You're probably going to have horrible headaches, and unfortunately it can take months to recover from. And in my opinion, by taking the proper amount of time and energy to strengthen those muscles, like every other part of the body, can mean the difference between having a life-changing event or just, well, unfortunately, I got to go to the collision shop and get my car fixed. And after, maybe a couple of rough nights of sleep, I'm back to 100%. So I'm in full agreement with what Coach Hasanovich is saying. I just wish that we lived in a world where he didn't have to say it, because it was just part of most people's routine strength training. And then as for, I guess, your finishing question there, the one thing that I've been trying to say for years is that the obvious next point for what we're doing is some sort of integration into the medical, I don't want to say the medical industry, but again, when someone goes to their GP for medical advice, they are getting a prescription for strength training. The medical community understands the necessity of strength training. And then we have the proper facilities and trainers who can get what's necessary out of the people coming in. I remember I was even on a podcast with Lawrence a couple years ago, and I was saying that I thought this was the future. And I had a bit of pushback saying that, it was almost kind of something special that we were doing. And I never thought it was that way. I thought it was just the next logical point. And now I'm even seeing facilities get on board with that, but I think they're even doing it wrong. They're talking about doing some sort of partnership or some sort of being an ally of the medical community. And that's, again, not correct. And it's small thinking. We need to be a part of it with them. And the way we've done that at STG is we now have a clinic, right, as part of the business. We have physiotherapists, we have chiropractors, we have massage therapists, sports therapists, registered dietitians, all people that have colleges of practices and are part of the healthcare in Canada. And right across the road from the clinic is the local doctor's office, and we deal with them directly. And essentially, we have people coming in, not because they just want to be the next biggest, baddest bodybuilder on the block, but because they have a team of people in the medical industry, the medical profession, that are showing them, telling them, and are educated on what strength training should be. And for the people that already have the facilities where they're using high-end equipment and they have the knowledge to back it up, that's what they should be looking towards. Now, this is my opinion, but I can tell you that this is how we've made our business decisions, and it's been well for us. And in terms of the future of helping people, that is where I see it going. But instead of looking at being maybe just a slice of the pie, I think they need to be looking at being an overall pillar that everything stands on.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for spending time with me. Thank you for your continued friendship. Thank you for making a medical lumbar machine available to me. I'm quite excited about it. I've had a few clients on it now, and I'm still learning, and we'll touch base again about some things. I learn one thing and it comes up with two other questions, so I'll be back in touch. I'm going to wish you a wonderful day, and I will send you the video of this at first, and then later it'll be put out as a podcast itself. So have a wonderful day, Mike. Thanks so much for your help and your time.
Have a great day, Richard. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome.